Gamar Chatima Tova. A story from Shalom Auslander. When I was a child, my parents and teachers told me about a man who was very strong. They told me he could destroy the whole world. They told me he could lift mountains. They told me he could part the sea. It was important to keep the man happy. When we obeyed what the man commanded, he liked us. He liked us so much that he killed anyone who didn't like us. But when we didn't obey what he had commanded, he didn't like us. He hated us. Some days he hated us so much, he killed us. Other days, he let other people kill us. We call these days holidays. On Purim, we remembered how the Persians tried to kill us. On Passover, we remembered how the Egyptians tried to kill us. On Hanukkah, we remembered how the Greeks tried to kill us. Blessed is he, we prayed. As bad as these punishments could be, they were nothing compared to the punishments meted out by the man himself. Then there would be famine, then there would be floods, then there would be furious vengeance. Hitler might have killed the Jews, but this man drowned the world. This was the song we sang about him in kindergarten. God is here, God is there, God is truly everywhere. Then snacks and a fitful nap. A second story. Years ago, before rabbinical school, when I was a student at Harvard Divinity School, I spent a summer as a hospital chaplain at Massachusetts General Hospital. The program I trained in is known as CPE, or Clinical Pastoral Education, and it is part of the required training for most clergy across faith traditions. This meant that half of our days were spent tending to patients, and the other half were spent learning how to be a chaplain and tend to the sick and the dying. As part of this, we would come together to recount and reflect on the conversations we had with patients. And across the board, we found that when we walked into a room and introduced ourselves as a chaplain, about 25% of the time, the patients would say, "Oh, well, I don't believe in God." And in those moments, our supervisor, a minister, taught us to say the following: "Tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in that God either." If you think that this is a presumptuous or a condescending response, further conversations with patients would reveal that they weren't really atheists. Instead, they didn't believe in the God that Shalom Auslander describes. So last year, when we decided to offer a multi-part theology class here at GRS, I suggested we name it, "Tell me about the God you don't believe in." So who is that God who you don't believe in? The answer from my patients at Mass General and from our congregants at GRS is often the same. It's Shalom Auslander's God, a man in the sky with a big white beard sitting on a throne acting with agency in the world, a God who is often angry and vindictive, a God who is fearful and stern, paternalistic and violent, an if-then God, and a God of ultimatums who says, if you do what I say, then you will be rewarded, and if you don't, well, you'll be smote or you'll go hungry, etc. That God is a God of punishment and moodiness, a God whose preferences sometimes shift without warning, and who might in one moment threaten to destroy a city, while in the next be persuaded to show mercy. But there's more. The biblical God is also a God of righteous anger, of prophets preaching, protecting the widow and the orphan, welcoming the stranger and refugee, and beating swords into plowshares. That biblical God is a God who wept with the Israelites as they suffered under Egyptian taskmasters and responded to the cries of the suffering and oppressed. This is the God of freedom, who led the Israelites out from slavery and split the sea, who chastised them when they celebrated the deaths of the Egyptians, their enemies. This is also the God who sent an angel down to save Hagar after Sarah banished her and Ishmael to certain death in the desert. This God, drawn in an eerily human image, is loving and compassionate, merciful and kind, and angry and vindictive and punitive and mercurial. This is a God, in other words, written in our image, a God as complex and complicated as any one of us. And this is also the God who, in an age of science and verifiable truths and proven facts, no longer feels believable or reflects justice to many of us. This is a God who Elie Wiesel wrote in his book Night, was thunderingly silent by the gas ovens and the gallows of Auschwitz, a God who looked on at the slaughter in Rwanda and the deaths of children from leukemia and lymphoma. This is why the book of Job, though it was written thousands of years ago, is perennial, as relevant today as the day it was written. In case you need a refresher, Job is a story of very bad things happening to a very good person, and the story of a God who, when confronted with unearned human suffering, sickness, and death, refuses to explain why. Job's God of ethical ambiguity and inexplicable morality says, when held accountable by Job, "You could not begin to understand my power, my mystery, or my logic, so don't even try." So where does this leave us? According to the most recent Pew study, which looked at American Jews and belief, a mere 17% of you sitting here tonight believe in the God of the Torah. The numbers among Orthodox Jews are a bit higher, in the 30s, but not by much, which suggests that for Jews, what you do and how you behave is far more important to religious identity than what you believe. But that's a different sermon. Why am I talking to you about this failure in talking to Jews about God and communicating about holiness in synagogue on Kol Nidre, the holiest night of the year? Why, on tonight of all nights, am I telling you what you likely don't believe in? For one reason. I want to allow for the possibility that even when our metaphors have failed us, the divine has been here all along. The holy, even when we failed to communicate about it in ways that resonated, didn't go anywhere. And so I want to tell you that within the boundaries of our tradition, there are dozens of Jewish theologies that go beyond the man in the sky on a throne. And so many of them are beautiful and powerful and important ways to talk and think about God. Some, like Martin Buber's theology, describe God as an experience of complete presence to and connection with another person, animal, or even with the holy itself. A moment or encounter when we are not manipulating or transacting with the other or using another, even in neutral ways, as the means to an end. In these moments, we transcend ourselves and time and come fully into the present and into connection. Martin Buber calls these I-thou moments, when our full presence to each other is an end unto itself. These experiences are fleeting and beautiful, and they cannot be engineered. Rather, they are passing interludes that, even in their brevity, leave us permanently transformed. There are also contemporary theologies, like Professor Melissa Raphael's. Raphael utterly rejects the idea that God was absent or silent during the Holocaust. Rather, she insists that God was very much present in the concentration camps, in the tender acts of care inmates showed for each other's sick and broken bodies. God was present in the smallest acts of compassion and kindness that persisted against staggering odds among those whose humanity was most debased and erased. When starving prisoners shared a potato with each other, when they smuggled food to someone sick so they wouldn't have to get out of bed, getting water for someone who was too sick to get it for themselves, sharing clothing, comforting someone in pain, or smuggling food to the dying when they could not leave the barracks. All of these were acts of resistance and holiness that transcended the hell that was the camps. And every time they happened, the Shekhinah, the intimate feminine presence of God, was there. And then there are sacred moments which don't fit neatly into any category. Times when we feel a sense of something. The holy, the sacred, the ineffable, a presence greater than ourselves. The awe we feel standing on top of a mountain, at the birth of a child, or in the arms of a lover. Or we might feel the holy in a sacred place, a grand cathedral, a hushed sanctuary, in the whisper of trees during a walk in the woods, at the taste of the first summer strawberry, or the watercolor streaks of a sunset resting on a far horizon, or at the deathbed of someone we love, or an experience of boundless, all-encompassing love that we once had with the help of psychedelics, at a meditation retreat, or when we heard live music that took our breath away and transported us. Or it may have been a piece of art that made time fall away. There are so many small and unexpected containers for the holy in this life. And though we might not think to call them by the word God, that doesn't mean that's not exactly what they are. There's also the moment I know many of us had tonight, when we stood as a community and listened reverentially to the repeated melody of Kol Nidre, the pathos of the cantor's voice and the cello's pleading refrain. Words that, even if we don't understand them, connect us to something much older and much bigger than ourselves. The tune that our grandparents and great-grandparents also stood for in their own synagogues in countries all over the world. A melody that tells us, you have been away for so long, but you've come home tonight. And you may feel shattered or broken or lonely or sick, but despite that, you are still whole and holy. Sit down, open the book of your life, and let your heart break open. Set down your burdens. You are home. Because the idea that God, all of the mystery and holiness and wonder in the universe, can be shrunk down to human size or body, or an anthropomorphized container for the source of all things, is, though understandable, pure Jewish chutzpah. To think that with our limited human intellects we can name and define the boundaries of such a force is heartbreakingly human in its grandiosity. Because even the man in the sky and the still small voice and the thundering voice from Mount Sinai and the shining face that Moses saw and the arm reaching into history to free the Israelites from generations of slavery, it's all a beautiful, lyrical, made for the big screen metaphor. But it is also a limited metaphor that attempts with unflagging Jewish optimism to stuff all the mysteries of the universe, of life and death and questions of ultimacy, into the body of a bearded man in the sky sitting on a throne. To be fair to the writers of the Torah, this makes sense. See, our ancestors knew no force in the world greater than kings, which is why we pray tonight and tomorrow, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, as a form of acknowledgement and respect and as a hat tip to the biggest power that our ancestors understood. But even the least scientifically inclined of us know the world to be much bigger and much smaller than this human-shaped metaphor. From the multiverse to quarks, from Einstein to Darwin, we have the blessing and at times the curse of being able to conceive of an animating force and energy so much bigger than a man in the sky. Or, more cynically, to quote the famous sociologist of religion, Peter Berger, our ancestors looked up at the sky and they saw a yawning abyss called Anime, a vacuum of darkness and nothingness. They could not live with this terror, and so they threw above themselves a sacred canopy to protect and shelter them, to give them a sense of purpose and place, to answer all of the mysteries that they could not. But here's the rub. Knowing that our ancestors created that sacred canopy they called God and religion doesn't make either any less meaningful or less real, because the canopy and the word God is infused with thousands, even millions, of very real and true human experiences of holiness, millions of moments of awe from hundreds of generations. What does this mean for us tonight on the holiest night of the year? Simply this. For thousands of years, Jews have understood Kol Nidre as a portal to the holy, a way of reaching beyond ourselves and this moment to the most high and the most sacred. And so what if we, like those who came before us, opened ourselves to the possibility of having that experience of the holy right here and right now, within these walls and with the ancient rhythms contained in these sacred books? What if we treated tonight and tomorrow as a doorway to the sacred, and rather than robotically reading the prayers, allowed the sounds of the Hebrew and the music to break open our hearts, to move us, and connect us to each other and something much, much greater? You might even call it God. Because for our ancestors, the next 24 hours were when the channel to the heavens was most open. It was the day when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies in the temple and utter just once the unknowable, unimaginably powerful name of God. And God, just for a brief moment, heard and came down to earth. It was a moment filled with anticipation and awe and fear and trembling, a moment that connected our small, finite lives to eternity. It was the moment when they believed the divine presence rested on the temple and on Jerusalem. Tonight is one of those moments. The channels are open, and the holy is here, waiting for each of us. All we have to do is walk through the open gates. Gamar Chatima Tova.